Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you The Slayer and the Slain by Helen McCloy. This is copyright 1958 by Gollancz, which is a UK publisher. So this is the UK edition, which I wasn't really expecting when I ordered this book. I was expecting the US edition, but I ended up with the UK edition, and I'll have a few things to say about that later, just for some fun. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Helen McCloy. So she was a very, very well-respected American mystery novelist. Her series character is Dr. Basil Willing, and he shows up in some of her very best works, although she did write plenty of standalones, and The Slayer and the Slain is one of them. She has several distinctions to her credit. She was the first woman president of Mystery Writers of America, and she also received an Edgar from the same organization for her criticism. So she was a woman who did many, many things well. Interestingly, I should point out something. I'm going to show you, this is one of her best known and most respected books, Through a Glass Darkly, which I definitely recommend. It's really, really quite good and, a little creepy in its way. But one thing I noticed when I was reading this book, or, looking at the author's bio on the back, is that Helen McCloy is described in terms of her relationship to the men in her life. So her biography talks about her father, who was sort of a famous guy, and her husband, who was a famous guy, the mystery writer Brett Halliday. And so I just sort of, my kind of feminist training from sort of my undergrad advisor and good friend and, other, feminist writers that I've worked with over the years, you see these things, I think, when you're trained to, where you might not notice them. And so, it wasn't enough on her bio just to talk about her and her accomplishments. She had to be described, in accordance with kind of the men in her life. And, that's, not necessarily good, right? But that's the way it was back then, and we have made strides now. So just something a little interesting, proof that men can read as feminist readers, and it probably behooves us to do so, because the more viewpoints we can understand, I think the more we can appreciate books and fiction and literature. So now, before I get into the actual book, I want to talk about this little hardcover here, straight out of the UK. So you may look at it and think, not the most interesting cover, right? And that was true of the Gollancz titles. They never invested any money in jacket art and jacket design. It was always type. So type on the front cover, type on the back cover. This kind of Wild West font does not do anything. I don't know if you can read here. It says, Miss McCloy is definitely the best butter. And I thought, what does that mean? We don't really, I've never heard that term used in the States, but, apparently it's a huge compliment in the UK. But, there are just some bizarre decisions made on this cover, right? So on the inside front cover, there are all sorts of blurbs about her other books, but it doesn't mention any of those books by name. So there are blurbs about her great books, but if you like a blurb and think, oh, I want to read that book, there's no mention of it. So you don't know which blurb goes with which book. Same thing on the back, lots of blurbs. And then there are blurbs about, I don't know whether these blurbs are about the Slayer and the Slain, or whether they're about other books, or whether this big quote down here, which says insanely ingenious, whether that's a quote about this book or not. There's no description on the flap or anywhere of the contents of the book or a summary of the plot or whatever. I just, don't really get that. I think that jackets have so much potential to sort of grab a reader in a bookstore. Why the publisher would not make more of that real estate, I don't quite get. But, that's just me. I'm a sucker for great jacket art, and it really isn't art in and of itself, the book jacket. I wish I had the artistic talent to design book jackets. It's a big disappointment in my life that I have no artistic talent. So that said, I just want to say that there's something about the trim size, the actual size of this book, that it just worked very nicely in your hand. Just lying on my couch at night, reading it. It wasn't too heavy. I could sort of wrap my hands around it. It feels nice. It's a nice feeling book. And of course, there's much more to a book than the jacket. But, point of interest, I like talking about publishing stuff, and so I will move on. Gollancz, apparently, I looked it up, these publishers, these imprints get sold and resold, and now I understand it's a part of Orion, which is a part of Hachette, which is one of the enormous publishers in the United States now. So let's talk a little bit about this book. As it opens, our narrator, it's a first-person narrator, has he's taken a bad fall in the ice, and he wound up with a concussion, but turns out he is okay. And soon thereafter, he realizes he is notified that he is the recipient of a very, very large inheritance from an uncle of his who lives down in Virginia. And he's our hero is teaching rather unhappily at a New Hampshire college. He doesn't like the cold. So he's like, it's my opportunity to just go back, go down, buy property in the area that I grew up, that I loved, and also to look up the woman that he loved, who sort of jilted him, and he never really got over her. But as soon as he arrives in Virginia, creepy things start happening. He's left these kind of threatening messages in a handwriting that seems familiar, but he can't figure out who wrote it or what their motivation was. He seems to lose track of time. He can't always keep track of what's going on. He keeps wondering if the concussion has had a stronger effect on him, or what, and it proceeds from there, and leads to an ending that I think was a relatively new plot twist at the time, there in the 50s. It's done a lot nowadays, so I think when you read this book, you probably don't realize, or one doesn't realize, that it was sort of a more shocking thing back then. I believe the first person to do it was Margaret Miller. And I checked on that, and the book in which she did it was published about 5 years before this one. So Margaret Miller was definitely first. And I don't want to tell you the book because I'm afraid that would be a spoiler, but really, Margaret Miller's fabulous. Anything you want to read by her, especially from her early works, will be terrific, except for Fire Will Freeze. Please don't start out with that one. So one of the things that I really like about Helen McCloy, not just this book, but her other books, is they have, the ones that I've read, a Gothic sense of kind of creeping menace with quasi-supernatural overtones, where you actually think seriously that something supernatural or not quite of this world or of the average human experience is happening. She was very interested in the concept of the doppelganger, and she does use that as a plot device in this book. But in this book, it's filtered through this concept of something called a co-walker, which is someone who is almost like a close mirror image of you, who walks near you and sometimes can be seen out of the corner of one's eye, but sometimes can't. And this all leads to some very curious goings on in here in this book, and an ending that you will definitely remember. I don't want to get into a lot of spoilers. I really like this book. I like Helen McCloy a lot. I liked the first person narrative here. That's an interesting choice, right? When you write in first person as a person who is the victim of a concussion, who may have some sort of problem, but you don't really know what it is or whether it exists. You can convey that sense of confusion and just keep the reader along with you, wanting to know as much as you do what is happening to you or what has happened, and if you really are being threatened by people who have it in for you, or if there's something else going on. So it's very suspenseful and gripping. It's a gripping book, and that can be said about all of the McCloy books that I have read to date. So I really recommend that you try one of Helen McCloy's books, either this one or one of her Basil Willing books. A very good writer. Could be rather interestingly philosophical, thinking about things that you just don't hear a lot of mystery writers thinking about. Altered states of consciousness and this whole doppelganger idea, and psychological abnormalities or disorders. These were the early days of sort of professional psychology. And what I can say is, in my career, I've been fortunate to edit books by really talented, top-notch psychologists and psychiatrists. And I was really kind of fascinated to see how McCloy brought a strong understanding of the discipline as it was at the time to this book. She didn't just, kind of toss pop psychology at you, but really got into the nitty-gritty of cognitive psychology and perception and sensation and all these really interesting things that the early psychologists were researching. So I was impressed by that, right? Because that meant there was some research in here, and she probably read a lot of psychology, for herself, because clearly it was an interest of hers and she took it very seriously. And that makes the book, it really sort of just, it grabs your attention and keeps your attention. Now, what I have to say is that some of this psychology is now outdated, in that, Freudian psychology has kind of gone away mostly. Not the idea of the talking cure and, some of his more, let's say, clinical theories are still kind of out there. But, that whole Michigas about the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex is just, like, there's no empirical evidence. It's kind of ridiculous. People took it at face value for, several decades, but they know, there's no empirical basis for it. So, like, if you're up on modern psychology, you'll see an interesting admixture of psychological foundations that are still accepted, along with some of the stuff that has since been outdated. But it doesn't affect the credibility of the book at all, because, you know, if you put yourself in the time frame in which it was published, you understand what is happening. There's some interesting things going on in that, you know, our narrator, who is white, moves to the South, and he has black servants in the house, and there's an awareness of American history and racial overtones there. Not a big part, but, you know, an awareness, which is good, right? Because it would be easy to just kind of blip over all of that. And an ending that you might be able to see coming, but not really until you're almost there. So many, many things to like about this book. I'll tell you just a couple things that are my criticisms. The first is that a lot of this book, you know, particularly like maybe the middle third of it, is this kind of, I don't want to say syrupy, but a little bit romance, you know, about the narrator mooning over his lost love and, you know, wanting to be near her, but, you know, kind of freaked out by her insanely jealous, drunken husband. And I don't know, I'm just not that romantic a guy. Like, love is good. You know, I'm in favor of it. I'm happy when people are in love, but this felt a little too romancy for me. You know, I guess I don't normally think of romance as the major, you know, plot center in mysteries, although, you know, it's always often there one way or another. So I didn't love that, but that's just who I am. You know, take that with a grain of salt. The other thing is that when you find out what's going on, the book almost turns into a textbook in terms of its exposition. Now, I did plenty of textbooks and love them. They don't quite work so well in a novel. And the last 20, 30 pages of this book read a little bit like a textbook or an encyclopedia of psychology. And it's all very, very interesting, right? Because these ideas were new at the time. But, you know, narratively, you know, in terms of a story, it's a little bit like an information dump. But like I said, I could live with that because of the, you know, just the era that the book was built in. You know what it's a bit like? You know, in Alfred Hitchcock's movie Psycho, after all the scary, horrible stuff has happened, at the very end, they bring in this psychologist who sits people down and explains everything that happened psychologically with Norman Bates and his mother. That's kind of like what happens here. There's like a very, I don't want to say tacked on, but very clear expository section at the end that, you know, maybe could have been done a little bit more subtly. But critics really like this book a lot, and so do I. So I'm not, you know, by any means bad-mouthing it. I'm just saying that that's just something that was a little bit less effective for me in the book. But I want to end this video by saying I really do like and admire Helen McCloy, and I recommend her highly. I hope you'll go out and you know, look up Helen McCloy, see if any of her books appeal to you. If you like that Gothic and that little quasi-supernatural possibility, the books are very provocative, and they do hold your attention because she's so good about keeping you a little unsteady on your feet, that you don't know what's going on, and that leads to really great suspense. So that's it for tonight. Helen McCloy, The Slayer and the Slain, in not the world's best best dust jacket. If you talk to people from the UK, they sort of, I guess of a certain era, they grew up knowing that, you know, when you saw this yellow and red and black, you knew it was a Gollancz title. And I don't want to badmouth Gollancz because that was their... They published some truly great original works, including Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. So clearly they were no slouches editorially. And they also published a lot of science fiction, and they have an interesting history. But they didn't believe in investing in jacket art. Just a lot of verbiage. Okay, so that's what I've got for you tonight. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.